Hello and welcome everyone to this presentation, Benefits and Considerations of Technical Auditing Related to Special Processes. I'm Mike Richmond, your host at Exemplar Global's Excellence in Auditing Expo 2024. This session is presented by Steve Snyder, and Steve is the Regional Director, Welding Technology Services for Asia, Africa, and Oceania for the American Welding Society. He's also an Exemplar Global ISO 9001 certified auditor. In this presentation, Steve is going to offer an in-depth look at technical auditing processes. So Steve, thanks for joining us here at the Expo.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. Happy to be here. And I'll just kick this off, as Mike said, explaining some benefits and considerations to technical auditing as related to special processes. So what are special processes? Well, they obviously involve specialized equipment and also many times qualified personnel with specializations. The special processes in manufacturing are typically defined by any process that would actually change the material's physical integrity or material elements. And the organization needs to validate those processes. And the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is the fact that the outputs that cannot be measured need to be validated up front. So when we're talking about that, it's important to establish a criteria on how they'll be evaluated. Now, it needs to be determined how the equipment supports that. Is it sufficient, and are the operators qualified? And very important is what records are kept from a production and quality standpoint. So, typical special processes. Now, this is not inclusive of all special processes by any means, and this presentation will be more focused on the welding and some non-destructive examination. But it's really important to consider that, let's say we're talking about welding, there's over 100 welding processes and materials joining. In non-destructive testing, or commonly referred to as non-destructive examination, I've listed some of the most common NDT methods here. However, there are several more. In addition to heat treatment processes, these are really the most common heat treated processes that are out there. However, there are over a dozen heat treatment processes. And also coatings is considered frequently a special process, whether it's conventional spray coating processes, as you see to the left, or it's a metallizing or thermal spray process you see in the center for corrosion resistance, but also machining, bolting, pressure testing, laboratory testing, even rigging could be considered a special process on projects or manufacturing. Now, this kind of moves us into the technical audit or technical assessment side of things. These are typically performed by an auditor with more specialized expertise in certain areas. They understand what the process is. They either have had experience in it or they've had additional training other than just in quality management systems to understand the processes. Now, the technical aspects of those processes is very important on how they're implemented by the organization. So the auditor needs to have a deeper knowledge in those areas and really a very clear understanding of the technical specifications, codes, and standards and how they apply to control those and qualify those special processes. But it is important to understand that various standards may well define a technical audit or technical assessment a little bit differently, all with the same basic intent and approach, however. So what are the benefits? Well, the benefits obviously are reducing liability and reducing the potential for non-compliances. It's also making sure that your suppliers are qualified, competent, and capable in providing those special processes, which are very, in many times, very critical to the service life of the component. It can also be a way to improve the performance of your supplier, as well as reducing cost and identifying areas that may be better for rescheduling certain type of special processes and how they align with the overall manufacturing process. So let's consider welding. As I mentioned previously, it is a special process. Therefore, it does require additional controls. And it does require competent, qualified personnel, and it needs to be effectively controlled and managed. Some of those considerations for your checklist, if you're using checklists, which most of us all use checklists, is things like contract review. All too often, the contract review, obviously where things start, is things that are overlooked maybe include acceptance criteria, even specific year of the code or standard, which they're revised, they're updated. Things are sometimes overlooked there in the contract review, so it's very important. And then confirming the qualifications of personnel is one of the most frequent things that I see that is overlooked. You know, specifications and codes and standards are very specific in regards to the qualifications of personnel. The equipment is very important. How's the equipment calibrated? Is it calibrated? Are the operators or technicians, are they properly trained in that equipment? And in most cases, we'll talk about welding and NDT, those individuals are requalified, not just to be qualified, but certified. So confirming those specific requirements is important, as well as what type of records need to be maintained by the code or standard or specification or contract, as well as if there are requirements for inspection test plans is also very important. So moving into understanding a metal fabricator is very unique, as is the welding manufacturing equipment that is involved. So some of those things that are very important to know about the fabricator's facility and resources appear in the below. Now, the number of qualified welders, their competency and their qualifications is important. What materials are they able to weld on? What positions are they able to make welds? Also, the qualifications of the quality control inspectors, and if non-destructive testing is employed other than visual, the personnel and their qualifications. Many times, the advanced requirements for welding may require a welding engineer specifically to determine what's required in regards to qualification of personnel and procedures. So other areas are to consider are the square footage of the facility and what's their actual capability. When you're talking about crane or overhead cranes or lifting devices and facility, that's going to lead into really what size of fabrication the workshop or facility is capable of doing and manipulating and handling in the facility itself. You know, supporting equipment includes anything from rolling, how the material, if it's required to be rolled, bending, obviously cutting. There's many factors included there that need to be considered in regards to the capability of the fabricator. The standards and codes, which we've mentioned previously, on which they comply with, as well as the maintenance of the program for the equipment, is very important. So are there welding procedure specifications? Welding procedure specifications are very important. They can be considered the third tier quality management system document or work instruction for the welder on the shop floor. Though those welding procedure specifications will give clear instruction to the welder or welding operator in regards to things like joint preparation, cleaning, amperage, voltage, travel speed, things that are essential to the welder to be able to know to set the equipment and comply with the specific code or standard. The PQR, which is considered a procedure or defined as a procedure qualification record, is specifically that. It qualifies, and it's a record that the welding procedure has been qualified. The next one goes back to talking about the performance qualification of the welder. That's recorded typically on a welder performance qualification record in compliance with a code or standard. Now, it's important to note that welders are tested more than any skilled craft in the world. The continuity of a welder is very important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. However, they are tested if they've not been engaged in a welding process for more than 6 months. They're required to be tested again, more so than any other craft, skill, or profession that I know Next, SOPs. We all know that standard operating procedures and work instructions are important for any quality management system. So are there procedures, clear procedures for inspection, visual inspection, and the acceptance criteria? Material traceability. Are there requirements for the material to be traced from cradle to grave, from the time it's received to the time it's shipped or after delivery? Personnel responsible for inspection, have they been properly trained and are they qualified? Most every code and standard requires a current eye exam for visual welding inspection personnel. Something that's obvious, maybe very obvious, but frequently is overlooked is, does the person have the right vision, color perception, depth perception to be able to do welding and or inspection? Welding consumable control means the consumables that are actually used in the welding process and how are they stored, how are they protected and controlled and traceable. Final documentation we can't go without talking about, because oftentimes as auditors, utilization of a trace backward method is the most effective way to be able to confirm compliance with contract specifications, which may be starting with the quality records, again, such as the welding procedures that were used. Also the performance qualification of those welders. Weld maps, meaning who welded what and when did they weld it. Frequently, codes and standards require a traceability of who did the work as well for accountability on qualifications. Non-destructive examination, also starting with those reports and backing into it, can often reveal if the acceptance criteria based upon the contract specifications was actually adhered to and recorded. It can also give one insight to the reject rates of defects and being able to produce KPIs. I mentioned the procedure qualification record again, very, very important on how a welding process was qualified. It's a record of what was done to prove that that material, that welding process, and the welder who performed it was able to actually develop a welding procedure. Consider it as a recipe of baking a cake, for example. You have to have a recipe on how to do that, and this is a documented method of that recipe. Certified mill test reports, if they're required, and also any records of subcontractors on their NDT, their coatings, or heat treatment that was provided to the welding fabricator. We talk about checklists just a little bit, and this is a snapshot of a technical audit checklist that was developed. You can see by the tabs below, there are multiple checklists depending on the actual special process. This one here focuses on welding. Obviously, most important is to know the audit criteria and which standard or specification or code you're actually auditing to. I put some examples here of the D11 Structural Welding Code, the American Petroleum Institute, as well as the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. But the point is that the technical requirements must be audited, including the operations, including how the processes were qualified, and how the processes are being controlled. And again, it's most important that the checklist is designed specifically for that. The NDE capabilities is another one, which we'll briefly talk about. But again, this starts with the technical requirements. It goes into the actual NDT operations or non-destructive examinations, and also the qualifications of the individuals that are doing the work in accordance with a criteria established as noted in red above. Now, many fabricators out there, although they may be ISO 9001 certified, they may not have specific details in regards to their welding operations. The American Welding Society has an accreditation program, which is both affordable and an alternative, or can be supplemented to ISO 9001 or ISO 3834-4, because many fabricators just simply don't require American Institute of Steel Construction or National Aerospace Defense Contractor Accreditation Program, or American Petroleum Institute, or American Society of Mechanical Engineering aligned quality management systems, because they don't produce parts for those industries. So this accreditation certification is sometimes uh, thought to be for larger fabricators, when actually small and medium-sized fabricators benefit the most as entrance points into joining top-tier welding fabricators, as showing they actually have a quality management system specifically focused on welding. Now, being accredited does involve that the facility establish that they have the personnel, the procedures, and the knowledge and equipment to conduct proper weldments. And there's a link here if you so choose to look at that a little bit further. However, what will your company really be responsible for? Well, I think you've probably gleaned by now that a fabricator is responsible for controlling contract documents, as well as procedures, material control, welding, inspection, and shipment. Now, the specification doesn't require that a fabricator control the design of the weldment or the bolting or the final codes. However, it doesn't preclude those activities as well. So when you're looking at the quality management system, this here is kind of an outline out of the specification that talks about what's required to operate that quality management system. It does include obviously the specific requirements of the quality manual, if you'd like to look at in more detail, but the accreditation is given based upon the scope of the fabricator. In other words, are they working to a marine, automotive, sheet metal, machinery, railroad, aluminum, stainless, sheet metal, etc. And the scopes can be for more than one. Some job shops do multiple components to multiple codes. Therefore, they seek accreditation to more than one AWS welding code or standard. Now, this here is just some information on resources for you if you choose to educate yourself a little bit more, learn a little bit more about welding, lean welding management, the economics of welding, which is very important and often overlooked by many, as well as standard welding procedure specifications and how they are developed and what materials and processes they cover. I've also included additional information for those that would like to learn a little bit more about non-destructive testing, heat treatment, and coatings in regards to training opportunities, education and training, and just to give yourself a little bit more insight to what is involved with those special processes. Now, in closing, for those of you that don't know, the American Welding Society was started about 105 years ago, during wartime, actually, by Woodrow Wilson being given a directive to form a committee for welding. So it's a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to advance the science and technology and application of welding and allied processes, which does include brazing, soldering, and thermal spray. So we do this by really providing real world opportunities for folks. We give away about $2.5 million a year in scholarships for folks that are seeking to go into the welding profession or in the welding profession to continue their education, including fellowships and workforce development. So we do provide those tools to help members succeed, inspire the future generation. That's our mission. So I want to thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to toss it back to Mike, and appreciate your time and attention today.
All right, Steve, great job. Thank you for doing that. Really, really good overview. As you can see there, if you have questions and you're watching this and you'd like to ask Steve some questions about his presentation, or if you have questions for any of us here on the Exemplar Global team about our expo and any of the sessions that you may have seen, just write us there. The email address, as you see, is info@exemplarglobal.org, and we'll get right back to you. If you have a question for Steve, we'll forward it on to Steve and he'll get back to you, or we'll get back to you on our team. Speaking of which, Steve, I actually had a question for you. As I was listening to your very fine presentation. So tell me a little bit about kind of the, I guess you could say it's a personality type. You know, who would get into assessing, auditing some of these special processes you're talking about within, say, welding? I mean, you know, people could stay as a welder their entire life, or they may seek to do some of this work in auditing. So how do you know which one is best for you in your career?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, Mike. And, you know, typically you'll find that those that are thirsty for continuing education and continuing knowledge. I mean, I've been at this for almost 40 years and I still learn something every week about welding. Literally, I mean, whether it's the new advanced additive manufacturing methods and utilizing robots. So you make a good point. It needs to be an individual that really wants to continue their learning and has a thirst for that. But it also needs to be, from a personality standpoint, a person that is able to interact with not just professionals, maybe in the management side, but being able to go out on the shop floor and communicate with the workers at the shop floor level, because they really like to talk to someone on the shop floor that's maybe walked a few steps in their role before. So it's interesting you bring that up, because of some of the best auditors and best inspectors, I'm talking about welding and non-destructive testing, are those that actually worked in the industry. They came up from the shop floor a little bit, so they have a really good bird's eye view of what it takes. And it's a difficult job. It's a difficult job to be a welder and to be a fabricator. It's much more difficult, in my opinion, to do that work than it is to audit that work.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, for all of you out there that are watching us and you're maybe participating in some of these technical fields and you're interested in it, it's a good opportunity. It's a great career. Steve, you can really go all around the world with this career, extend your career pretty far, and have some really interesting opportunities to do this work. So it's pretty cool.
And keep in mind, we have scholarship applications open every year, and I think we're over $2.5 million, as I said. So we're always looking for individuals that may be interested in going in and starting a career in the field, and being able to help support them as well based upon their need. So thank you very much, Mike.
Excellent. Good stuff. Yeah, that's what we're all about, is we're trying to support people in their careers and career development opportunities. So that's a good one. A little different from some of the career opportunities that you might find in some of our other sessions here at the Expo. So this was a good one. So Steve, thanks again for doing that. All of you who watched this session, yeah, it was great having you. All of you that have watched this session, you can claim CPD for this, as well as all of our Expo sessions. So check that out. And again, Steve, thank you for joining us. Thank you all for being out there. And we'll see you again at the next session here at Exemplar Global's Excellence in Auditing Expo 2023. So long.